Next on the news.
The water came from three directions and the whole community was submerged. It was like Atlantis.
It's a community in the Diocese of Brooklyn that was slammed by Superstorm Sandy. Now we take a look at Breezy Point 10 years later. And an emotional day in court as the verdict comes down for the man accused of driving his SUV into a Christmas parade in Wisconsin. Also, it was an act of heartfelt generosity. So why did a grandmother wind up getting arrested for feeding the homeless? Plus, he made it to the game, the coal miner who put his young son first ahead of cleaning up after work. I'm Christine Persichetti. Currents News starts right now. With Hurricane Sandy came wind, floods, and fire, and the Rockaways were ravaged. The night the storm made landfall, the Beachtown Peninsula changed forever. For those who didn't evacuate, Breezy Point was suddenly inescapable. 40 survivors looking toward a small team of volunteer firefighters for bravery. And now, 10 years later, Currents News' Jessica Easthope spoke with the chief at the time about the storm that defined his career.
The water was right about at this point, right?
It's been a decade, but Marty Ingram can still see it when he closes his eyes.
This rust right here is the result of the salt water that we drove through on the night of Sandy.
The chaotic scene playing out in front of him. Water surging through the doorway of the Point Breeze Volunteer Firehouse where he was chief. Survivors in life jackets and a firestorm in the sky.
Going into the clubhouse, that videotape is running in the back of my head. It's difficult.
The night Hurricane Sandy made landfall, an electrical fire started in one home, and within hours it had spread to 134 others. Carried by the storm's powerful wind, the damage to the Rockaways already unimaginable for Marty. And now he was fighting the biggest residential fire in Queens history.
It was truly a combat scene. The power lines were on fire. And, you know, if it was a Disney surround movie, it would have been beautiful. But this thing was real, and it was scary.
The peaceful peninsula, now a far cry from that moment on October 29, 2012. More than 1,000 homes and businesses were destroyed. Since then, the Rockaways have rebuilt, elevated more than 100 homes, undergone beach restoration, and erected protective sand dunes. But sometimes, Marty says, it feels like they're frozen in time.
Nobody trains you on how to handle it after the fact. Everything resurrected, you know, so it brought me back to that moment in time. For the faithful volunteers that helped us rebuild and give us hope.
Amid the devastation, this statue of Mary stood unharmed. Over the years, Marty says it's come to symbolize what he called a miracle.
And with all the devastation and destruction, nobody died. We said our prayers, and they were answered.
The storm couldn't wash away his faith. Just like Breezy Point, it's been built back stronger. Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
The man you just met in Jessica's story, Marty, actually wrote a book about his experience during Sandy. It's called Flood, Fire, and a Superstorm, in which he says God was on his side, allowing miracles to happen. He joins us now. Marty, why did you write this book?
I wrote this book actually because I used to tell my grandkids bedtime stories. And as they got older, they were the ones who said, you got to tell the story.
Yeah, sure.
And I did. I put pen to paper and got the book out.
Well, it's a great story for everybody to read. Now, you say prayer changed the entire course of the rescue effort that night. I want to read a quote from your book. You wrote, "We did a total of 3 prayer huddles. The first 2 were Our Fathers, and the last one was a Hail Mary. And after each prayer, I saw a positive change that told me someone was listening. And in my opinion, these positive changes could be considered miracles." So what were some of the miracles you feel you experienced?
Well, we didn't realize it at first, but the Rockaway Point Volunteer Fire Department had boat crews that were trying to get to somebody's house to rescue them, and they couldn't make it, and they sought sanctuary with us.
And you were in a community center that was elevated, right?
Yeah, we were in an elevated clubhouse right next. We had just abandoned the firehouse because the firehouse was flooded. Yeah. Eventually, the trucks went underwater.
Oh, so scary.
So magically, after we said our prayer, 3 boat crews came in, and they were able to navigate the turbulent waters. Right. So that was the first prayer huddle. The second prayer huddle, at that time, We knew that the tide came in early, 6 hours early, the high tide, and it was a moon high tide, and it was staying there. And magically, after we made the second prayer, we could start seeing the tide to go out. And that was just remarkable that now we had seen the beginnings of this fire. We had no way to get to it, but we know with the receding tide, there would be a time in the near future that we'd be able to fight and go to it. And so the third prayer, at one point the wind, we saw that the wind had shifted, and we thought that was really good because now we're on the back end of the storm, and we're halfway through it. But what had happened was with the wind shift, it was really bad for us in terms that now the building we were in was immediately downwind of 135 wooden structures totally on fire, and the smoke plume, which had embers flying through it. It looked like a meteor storm. What happened there was it now engulfed us in that building. People couldn't breathe. And we were now forced to evacuate.
Yeah.
The only problem was we knew our trucks were underwater.
Yeah, they're flooded.
And we really had no other way. There was still standing water that was 9, 10 feet deep, and we had 40 people of all ages. So we had, the first plan we came up for, and I really didn't think it was going to happen, but I got the chauffeurs, the drivers of the fire trucks. I said, risk leaving this building, go back to the firehouse. There were white cap waves between the two buildings.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, see if the trucks will start. Miraculously, the truck started. And that was the three miracles there. But overall, the miracle, other miracles that occurred was we could have lost the entire community.
Yeah, nobody died.
And nobody died.
And now this book, you say it can kind of be a guide for other communities if they ever have a disaster like this. How?
It's not written as a textbook with specific instruction, but there are a lot of tips and a lot of preparation, that people can really use. It could be a good support subject for a disaster preparedness class. It's a lot of action. It's not the boring textbook, but it's designed to help people, global communities around the world, to handle multiple concurrent disasters and prepare for them.
Author and retired volunteer fire department chief Marty Ingram, thanks so much for coming and telling us about your book.
God bless. Bye now.
If you'd like a copy of Marty's new book, Flood, Fire, and a Superstorm, head on over to Amazon.com. There will be a Mass in Breezy Point in honor of the 10-year anniversary. It will be at St. Thomas More Church in Blessed Trinity Parish. That's at 20425 Rockaway Point Boulevard this Saturday, October 29th at 5 p.m. Attorneys in the Diocese of Brooklyn took a break and went to Mass to celebrate the start of the new court year. Known as the Red Masses, the services are held each year to give lawyers and judges the opportunity to renew their Catholic faith and start the judicial season off with a blessing. The diocese held 2 Red Masses, one at the Immaculate Conception Center in Douglaston and the other at the Cathedral Basilica of St. James in downtown Brooklyn. The homily at the Queen's Mass was delivered by Monsignor Stephen Aguja, a canon lawyer himself, while Bishop Robert Brennan celebrated the Brooklyn Mass.
You are holy people living out a holy vocation. Now, you might not hear that on the street all the time, but indeed, you are holy people living out a holy vocation. And I thank you for that.
The masses were organized by both the Catholic Lawyers Guild of Kings County and Queens County. The Colombian Lawyers Association, a group of lawyers of Italian descent, helped organize the Brooklyn Mass. If you're interested in learning more about the Red Masses, then be sure to pick up a copy of the Tablet newspaper or visit the website at thetablet.org. The Brooklyn paper takes an in-depth look into the Catholic tradition and delves into the centuries of history that surrounds it. It was a historic promotion as the city swore in its first ever female fire commissioner Thursday morning.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Commissioner Laura Kavanagh.
After reciting the oath of office on a Bible given to her by her grandmother, Laura Kavanagh is now officially the first woman to lead the FDNY in its 157-year history. During the ceremony, she reflected on her commitment to the position and the department as a whole.
This is the type of FDNY Commissioner I will be. One that knows that I will succeed only if every person in my department and in our city sees my place at the table as also their own. This moment, me being first, only matters if I am not the last.
Kavanagh has served as interim fire commissioner since her predecessor, Daniel Nigro, announced his retirement in February. A wild ride in Queens when an MTA bus was hijacked by a gunman Thursday morning. Police say the suspect ran in front of the Q4 bus in Cambria Heights with a gun in his hand, demanding that the driver open the doors and drive. Before taking off, the driver opened the back door so passengers could escape, and then he himself jumped out of a window, sending the bus crashing into a utility pole. The suspect has been arrested, and the driver is being treated for minor injuries. As New York City struggles to get a grip on the migrant crisis, National Guard members are stepping in to help. They're providing support to the staff operating city shelters and other emergency sites, helping with food distribution and managing shelter capacity. They are not, however, assisting with security, social services, or case management. The deployments come less than a week after the mayor of El Paso said his city would no longer be sending buses of migrants to New York City, crediting recent changes in federal policy. But despite the El Paso mayor's decision, migrants are still being transported to cities across the country. Right now, more than 100 migrants, mostly babies and children, are living in a hotel in Kingston, Massachusetts. The town administrator says they barely received any notice and had to scramble to accommodate their stay. The town administrator says he's under the impression the group will be at the hotel possibly through the end of the year. And after 16 months, negotiations have fallen through for temporary protected status holders, putting more than 300,000 migrants at risk of deportation. The case stems from a 2018 lawsuit against the Trump administration when the former president moved to end protections for the majority of immigrants under the TPS program. The migrants affected are currently in a state of legal limbo and could be deported unless there's action by the court or the Biden administration. Also in limbo, the tens of millions who have applied for student loan forgiveness. A legal challenge has paused President Biden's program, leaving the borrowers who were promised debt forgiveness as early as this week wondering, what now? Jen Sullivan has more on what those who qualify for relief should know.
Debt relief in legal limbo. A federal appeals court put President Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness program on pause for now.
I'm still waiting for that relief, right? No one's had their debt canceled yet.
Friday's move barred the administration from canceling loans, while the court considers a legal challenge from 6 Republican-led states. So, what does it mean for the more than 20 million people who've applied for relief so far? The Biden administration appears confident the program will prevail.
But we're not deterred. We'll keep fighting for you and pushing through.
The administration had said Sunday was the earliest day it would start discharging loans. So people will now have to wait a little longer while the program's fate is decided.
I'm one of the people that we're fighting for.
Cody Hunanian is the executive director of the Student Debt Crisis Center, a nonprofit focused on ending the student debt crisis, who is also waiting for some of his debt to be forgiven.
It's not going to erase my entire debt, but it's a third of my student loan debt, and it, one, opens up the door, hopefully, for the ability to purchase a home, invest in myself in a different way.
The program would dismiss up to $10,000 in debt for eligible applicants, up to $20,000 if they received Pell Grants. So, what should you do if you qualify? The White House is still encouraging people to apply at studentaid.gov. And the Better Business Bureau continues to remind you to beware of ongoing scams.
Scammers have been right there to take advantage. They know that there's a bit of confusion about what's going to happen next.
I'm Jen Sullivan.
There's a lot more news headed your way. The victims' families finally have some closure. A verdict for the man accused of driving his SUV into a Christmas parade. And they sent handwritten letters to Pope Francis. Now the Vatican has responded to the children of Uvalde, Texas. Plus, how a grandmother wound up getting arrested simply for feeding the homeless in her community.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Darrell E. Brooks, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide.
Guilty on all 76 counts. A jury in Waukesha County, Wisconsin convicts Darrell Brooks. He's the man who drove his SUV right through a Christmas parade, killing 6 people. Among them, an 8-year-old boy and 3 women, members of the Dancing Grannies. Dozens of others were injured. Now, after nearly a year, victims and their families finally have some closure.
He put people through so much pain and suffering for what his actions were.
Don Teague's son, Eric, was critically injured in the parade as he marched with the Waukesha South Band and has faced a long recovery.
It's been a long day waiting. Something that this community needed is closure. You know, we're just so thankful for the community, the support that we've been getting.
Amber Conkey's daughter, Jesselyn, was critically injured and is still recovering from another recent surgery.
All of this is important to me, for not just my child, but for everybody. It's all very important. It means a ton. I mean, my daughter was ran over that day, so you know, it just means a bunch to me. It really does.
The family of dancing granny Virginia Sorensen, killed in the parade, placed a small vial of her ashes in the courtroom as the verdicts were read.
We've been praying for this day for a long time, and this morning my 5-year-old daughter came up to me and handed me this necklace with my mom's ashes in it, and she told me to take my mom with us for the sentencing. So she was with us today, and I just want to thank everyone for what they did today.
It's been a difficult day. I know that this will give us healing. This is another step forward in this process. We've been resilient all the way through. One of the things that I've said so much throughout this is that we're stronger than him, and it's been proven today.
Brooks was found guilty of 6 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. In Wisconsin, that carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison. The Catholic community of Waukesha called the verdict another step on the road to healing. Posting in part shortly after the verdict, we continue to pray and support the families and individuals who will spend their lives overcoming the loss of loved ones, innocence, and trust. It is within the healing presence of our Lord Jesus Christ that we take the next steps. Our faith will carry us forward as individuals and as a community. Some of the young survivors of the shooting at Robb Elementary have sent the Pope handwritten letters. The words and drawings came from students who transferred to Sacred Heart Catholic School, which facilitated the letter writing project. The authors and artists include kids who were shot and survived, as well as those who lost loved ones during the massacre last May. A letter written on behalf of the Holy Father thanked the kids for their letters and said he will keep them and their families in his prayers. The trial of Cardinal Joseph Zen reopened in Hong Kong on Wednesday, just days after the Vatican announced a renewal of its agreement with Beijing. Prosecutors continued their case against the 90-year-old retired Bishop of Hong Kong. Zen and 5 other defendants are accused of failing to properly register a fund that provided legal help to pro-democracy protesters. All of the defendants have pleaded not guilty. Hundreds of thousands of Catholics made their voices heard in the U.S. alone, participating in listening sessions for a worldwide synod process. Now, the Vatican has a new document designed to keep the conversation going. The paper is called Enlarge the Space of Your Tent, and it includes the findings from 112 Episcopal conferences, including the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. The working document will serve as a tool for discussion and reflection between conferences during the Continental stage, which for the North American virtual meetings will include the United States and Canada. The USCCB had this to say on the paper. The document for the Continental stage is a profound reflection that brings together the hopes and concerns expressed by the geographically diverse communities within the Universal Church in the first stage of the Synod. As we continue to the next stage, this document will be fundamental in our ongoing discernment. Those continental meetings will happen in late 2022 and early 2023. All 7 continents will draft documents, which will then be the basis of a universal document completed by June of 2023. The universal phase will be held in 2 parts, first in October of 2023 and the second in October of 2024. Still to come on Currents News, grandma gets arrested. Why feeding the hungry landed this elderly woman in jail. Plus, skipping the shower after work to rush to a basketball game with his family pays off for a Kentucky coal miner. A 78-year-old grandma in Arizona was arrested for feeding the homeless. Turns out Bullhead City, Arizona has a law against giving food to homeless people in public parks because it can cause a public nuisance. Joe Dana reports.
I went up and talked to her. I said, what are you doing? She goes, I'm just bringing the transients some food. They're hungry.
Police video obtained by the nonprofit Institute for Justice shows Bullhead City Police making the decision to arrest 78-year-old grandmother Norma Thornton earlier this year. She broke a city code that bans giving food to the homeless in public parks.
I think this is a PR nightmare, but okay. Here's the bad news. You're under arrest.
I am?
Yes, for violating the city ordinance. Good news is, all I'm going to do, get your fingerprints, all that stuff, and I will bring you right back here. Technically, I'm supposed to be handcuffing you and everything too, but I'm not going to do that.
The group supporting Thornton's cause, showcasing online the police video and comments from Thornton about her arrest.
To be told that you cannot feed the hungry, regardless of what the circumstances are, is sad, but it makes me really, really angry, to put it bluntly.
Thornton says she'd been sharing her passion for cooking with people in the park for 4 years.
When I was serving in the park, word would get out that I was serving, and it was much easier for people to get to me and to the food.
We're seeking to have this ordinance prevented from being enforced against Norma so she can go back to the park.
Attorney Surin Johnson represents Thornton in the lawsuit against the city.
The only time the ordinance actually criminalizes the activity is when the food being shared has a charitable motivation.
What about the idea that cities need to have organized efforts, homeless shelters, soup kitchens?
Here in Bullhead City, we do have a few shelters, we have a few food pantries, and they do an amazing, important service to the community. But they're not enough. Norma is filling gaps by sharing her food in the park.
That was Joe Dana reporting. The city dropped the criminal charge against Thornton, but warned she will be arrested if she returns. For now, she's moved her charity food operations to another part of town on private property. A Kentucky man is going viral for wearing his work clothes to a college basketball game. That's because he works in a coal mine. Michael McGuire didn't have time to go home and shower before meeting his family at the Kentucky basketball scrimmage, so he showed up covered in coal dust. He didn't care. He just wanted to make memories with his son.
He had a blast. He was dancing, and every time they would slam dunk it, he would go crazy.
Well, this picture caught the attention of the Kentucky men's basketball coach, who shared it on social media, saying it hit home because his family's American dream started in a West Virginia coal mine. He also offered VIP tickets to Michael's family for a future game. That's awesome. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.